Hey everyone, thank you for joining us again for another episode of our Pioneer series with Mike Rogers on the Florida Bonsai podcast. If you haven't already, please click the subscribe button or the follow button, depending on what platform you're listening on or watching on. And thanks again for being here today. And thanks, Mike, for joining us again. Today, we're going to be talking about defoliation, internodes, and ramification in warm climates like Florida. We are here in my nursery today. It's another brutally hot day in summer here in Jacksonville, Florida. So, as we talk about these things, one of the most common questions I hear from bonsai artists in warm climates like Florida is, how do I keep my trees from growing too fast? Trees grow quickly with our long growing season here, and that can mean long internodes, coarse branching, big leaves, unless we take control. So today we're going to dive into some of the strategies that we can use to tame that growth and produce really nice bonsai trees. So we'll start with internodes, which is, for those of you who don't know, internodes is the space between leaves or branches. Leaves become branches ultimately. And we're going to look at those space to determine whether a tree looks refined or leggy. So if it has long internodes, it's going to look leggy. If it has short internodes, it's going to look more refined. And in hot, humid climates, internodes stretch really quick. If you're not careful, it can happen in no time. And what many don't realize is that internode length is set by a combination of energy levels, environmental cues, and the timing of your pruning. So let's talk to Mike and find out how he's been able to produce so many well-refined trees over the years. Mike, what are some factors that influence internode length in warm climates like Florida with species like ficus, for example?
The main two factors are the type of fertilizer you use and the intervals of pruning. If you want to get shorter internodes, then you have to use less nitrogen. The only time I use a lot of nitrogen is when I'm developing a tree, but once I put the tree into refinement, I use the same fertilizer, I just use less of it, so it's getting less nitrogen. And then you have to prune. I see a lot of people, they let the trees grow out 10, 12 internodes, and then they prune it back, and you'll never get a refined tree like that. Once you put your tree into refinement mode, you need to prune it really regularly, twice a week. Pull the center buds out, either cut them out or pull them out with your fingernails. If you let it grow out 3 or 4 nodes, then it's already getting long internodes. You need to increase your pruning and reduce the amount of nitrogen the tree gets.
And how do you balance the potential to weaken the tree by pruning so frequently? Because we've talked about how you need to let trees grow and then cut back for them not to weaken. So how do you balance that? Is it this year I'm in fine ramification mode, and then next year maybe I need to let it grow a bit and cut back to recover? Or what do you think of that?
In Japan, all the pictures in all the books, those trees were worked on for a year or two to get them to look like that. But once they take the picture or take it out of a show, they'll put it in a bigger pot and just let it grow. Not grow way out, but they let it grow in volume, and that strengthens the tree. Probably about every 5 to 10 years, give the trees a year of rest. There was an old banker in Hong Kong, his name was Mr. Wu. He was heavy into Penjing, and he published a book that was really pretty cheap because it was just a donation. He didn't need the money on his Penjing, but he would take his trees every 10 years and just put them in the ground. He had a hillside behind his house, and it was terraced, and he would just put the trees in the ground for a year and just let them grow, period, and then put them back into a bonsai pot. Keeping trees tight, show ready all the time, it's going to weaken the tree. You need to give it intervals of growth.
Here and there. So at least every 5 or 10 years, you need to take a step back and let the tree grow, you would say. But you will trim regularly, very frequently, for a few years at a time while you're trying to get a tree ready for show and get its final ramification in place. Okay. Good to know. Can you talk us through how you manage internodes on a tree that wants to grow aggressively all year?
Same thing.
Just frequent pruning?
Frequent pruning. One of my favorite trees is the parrot speak, and they grow just unrelenting. And if you want to keep it tight, then you're going to have to trim it probably twice a week. It sounds a lot. Most people don't want to do that, but if you want to have world-class trees, you have to do the work, and it's just work. You have to do the work that gives you good internodes and ramification. If you're just letting your trees grow out 10, 12, 14 internodes, you're never going to get good ramification on any tree.
Sure. And are there certain pruning mistakes that lead to longer internodes? Timing or otherwise?
Yeah, timing is longer intervals between pruning leads to longer internodes, and giving it a lot of nitrogen is going to exacerbate that problem because it's going to grow even faster.
Sure. Do you change your watering or fertilization habits to keep internodes short without weakening the tree when you're working on refinement?
Now, when I start working on refinement, I just give it less. I use a product called Sun Coat. It's similar to Osmocote, but the coating is formulated for Florida weather. And it's not as high nitrogen as Osmocote, but when I'm developing a tree, I'll put more of it on the tree. But then when I put it in a bonsai pot and start to develop ramification, then I'll use less fertilizer. You can switch to organics if you want. That's a lot less nitrogen than any of the chemical fertilizers. If you buy ready-made organic fertilizers, it's pretty expensive. And if you make your own organic fertilizer, which I have done, it's just a pain. You mix it and then dry it, and you get a rainy week in Florida, it doesn't want to dry, it gets moldy. If you can't afford to buy ready-made organic fertilizer, then just get a lower nitrogen chemical fertilizer and just use less of it.
Sure. And Suncoat, which we also use, is a relatively low nitrogen ratio fertilizer when it comes to chemical-based, as far as chemical-based fertilizers go, synthetic fertilizers go. So it's a pretty good product. And so you're able to just cut back on that Suncoat and ultimately get refinement without worrying about the organics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of people switch to organics for refinement phase. I also don't. And I think the reason probably is just I have too many trees here to care for to do that. But there may be something said for that if you're trying to get a show ready for a national exhibit. Hey, by all means, it may be worth the work. And it also may work better in your climate than it does here in Florida as well. So let's talk a little bit about defoliation, right? Because that can play a part here in Florida in how we ramify and ultimately refine the trees. In Japan, defoliation is also used, right? They defoliate mostly around the seasonal dormancy. But here in Florida, trees don't really stop growing, especially our tropicals. And that changes how defoliation works. So when it's done, it can improve ramification, leaf size, it can help with light penetration, but when it's done wrong, it can set a tree back or invite fungal problems. What's your criteria for deciding whether or not a tree should be defoliated or partially defoliated in Florida?
As you prune a tree over the summer, you're really looking at the canopy and the outline of the branches. You really aren't most of the time getting in there and redoing the structure of the branches as you prune over the summer. Every now and then you just have to take in tropicals and cut them back hard, and that pretty much defoliates them. Some tropicals, they don't like to be defoliated as much as others. Most ficus you can defoliate them anytime you want, except for late in the fall. Most of the tropicals, all the tropicals, they really need to be growing through winter. Our winters are short, but if you cut a tree back hard late in the fall, which is here is December, it's not going to be actually growing by the time winter hits, which is generally January and February. So your tropicals tend to decline if they're not growing during the winter. I fertilize through the winter on the tropicals. I cut back fertilizer on, I don't grow pines anymore because I don't have enough sun. But deciduous trees, you don't fertilize them at all when they're defoliated. Junipers, I fertilize lightly through the winter because they like our cooler weather in the wintertime. They grow really well in the wintertime here. I know up north they go dormant And they even change colors. They get blues and purples and oranges in your junipers, but here they just stay green and they grow through the winter. They like the cooler weather. So you have to take advantage of that in junipers because they slow down growing during our hot weather.
Certainly do, particularly on a day like this where it's very hot. How does species choice impact your defoliation strategy? For example, what's the difference between a ficus, which we can readily defoliate, and let's say another tropical like a Brazilian rain tree?
Brazilian rain trees, when you're developing them, you're growing them fast and furious. And I've seen people cut them back really hard to a stump, and they don't like that at all because they're a fast growing tree. And when you take a big tree and cut it down to a stump, I've seen the trees just die. So basically, if your tree is in for ramification and you have branches, secondary branches and tertiary branches, then you can defoliate a Brazilian rain tree with no problem. But if you cut back to hard wood, you start seeing a lot of problems with these fast growing trees like Brazilian rain trees.
Is it better to do partial defoliation on rain trees, maybe leaving internal growth in place that you want, and doing like outer partial defoliation just to get sunlight in? Or do you do a full?
I really never fully defoliate any tree unless I'm cutting it back hard. And Brazilian rain trees, I really never cut back that hard. I like to chase the branches back and let them bud back where you want. Otherwise, you just run into problems with them. But trees like ficus, no matter how you prune over the summer, your branches get heavy. You have to cut back to something and rewire. That's when basically, when you're cutting back hard in the middle of summer on a ficus, that's basically when I defoliate them because you don't have any leaves left. You're not specifically trying to defoliate it. You're just cutting it back to a point to where you can pull in some new younger branches and wire them out. Basically, the tree gets defoliated.
When you see an artist in Florida defoliate, let's say a buttonwood, an immaculate buttonwood, a fully finished tree, is their goal for defoliating in the summer simply to maintain the structure that they have and maybe some leaf reduction? Is that their goal, you would say?
It's leaf reduction, internode reduction. I don't really grow buttonwoods. They don't do well through our winters. I never kept my greenhouse hot enough to keep them growing well, and they've never been my favorite tree. But further south, they'll defoliate buttonwoods several times during the summertime, and it doesn't seem to do any damage to them. But I would say if you're keeping even a buttonwood, because the buttonwood is also a fast-growing tree, and if you're keeping that tight and compact all the time, that tree is going to eventually decline. So you're going to have to let it grow periodically.
Yeah, which is an old adage we keep coming back to, right?
Yeah.
That all of these techniques have a time and a place, but it's not every day, every year necessarily something you should always do.
You can't keep trees show ready on your bench 365 days a year after year. You're just going to have to let them grow and regain their strength. The whole point of bonsai is to weaken a tree. When you're developing it, you're letting it grow. The internodes are long, the leaves are big, and when you start the ramification, the whole goal is to weaken the tree. And if you do that year after year, the tree is going to get weak. It uses up its reserves. Since you're cutting off all the new growth, the leaves don't have the time to mature and really start producing a lot of sugars which feed the tree. So the tree just gets weaker and weaker over time. So periodically you really need to let a tree grow, no matter what species it is.
And have you ever had any defoliation failures that were due to heat or humidity or disease? And what did you learn from that?
I really don't use defoliation a lot. Like I said, most of the trees I defoliate are tropicals like ficus. Even some tropicals like the water jasmine, they don't like to be defoliated that much either. During our wintertime, the water jasmines and even the pear speaks, they'll just drop all their leaves. They look like they're dormant, but they're just weakened to a point to where they don't like when the sun goes way down. We get a lot less sun in the wintertime, And at my place, I got a big grove of oak trees on the south side of my property, so the sun falls below those, so I get hardly any direct sun during the wintertime, and basically tropicals don't like that. And some tropicals, like the parrot's beaks and the winter jasmine, they just drop all their leaves.
Have you ever used defoliation to reset a tree that had maybe grown out of control, for example?
Yeah, if a tree grows, and I get that a lot too, because I got a lot of trees, yeah, you cut it back hard and then let it reset to where
So
you want
so you do, but the defoliation becomes kind of part of a hard cutback.
it. Yeah,
And after your hard cutback, if there's a few leaves left over, you might pull them off.
exactly.
I got it. Okay, that makes sense. And I find that's how I end up doing it a lot too. Is you do a hard cutback, and then the defoliation process becomes rather simple because there's not
Yeah,
many leaves left
yeah.
after your hard cutback anyway. Okay, let's talk about ramification in the south here on deciduous trees because it's a little bit different, right, than how they grow up north. Ramification's what gives bonsai that fine, delicate branching that mimics age and maturity in the trees, which is what we want. But in cold climates, deciduous trees backbud naturally after winter. In Florida, because we have a lack of dormancy, it can make ramification harder, especially if trees never fully drop their leaves and leaf back out, which is almost essentially a natural defoliation process. So, Mike, what are the biggest challenges when trying to build ramification on deciduous trees here in the South?
Some trees that don't naturally drop all their leaves here, depending on how cold it gets, are like Chinese elms. If my Chinese elms don't defoliate at the beginning of winter, I defoliate them. One of the tricks on deciduous trees is when they start to change color, then go ahead, unless you're going to take a picture of it in full fall color, just when they start to change color, just go ahead and defoliate them. That gives them more time to let sunlight into the back buds. If you leave all those leaves on until, they won't drop here until probably way after Christmas, middle of January, you've lost 2-3 weeks of the sun hitting those back buds, and the back buds get weak, and that's why a lot of times they don't bud out. So once your trees start changing colors, just go ahead and defoliate them and give them an extra 2-3 weeks, even a month of not having any leaves. And you get sunlight, which is a lot less during the wintertime even here. Get sunlight to the back buds and keep them strong.
And do you find that species like elm or hornbeam behave differently here than they do in the northern states?
The American hornbeam grows from, it used to grow down into South Florida. I used to collect hornbeams in Broward County, but there are none left down there with all the development. I've never grown hornbeams up north, so I really can't say. I know they grow, the American hornbeam grows strong here, better than other hornbeams. I collected a hornbeam up in North Georgia one time and brought it down, and it only lived about 2 years. It was not an American hornbeam. The Korean hornbeams don't grow as well here as the American hornbeam because they're from Korea, and Korea is way up north.
What's your approach to timing branch pruning for maximizing backbudding in warm climates?
When I go to repot a tree in the wintertime, then I'll cut back to back buds or smaller branches, because as you're pruning over the course of the summer, the branch ends tend to get thick and they just want to grow at the ends. So when you're repotting, that's a good time, since they're dormant, to cut back the branch ends and wire some smaller branches out. That's the hardest time that I cut back, is when I repot. You cut them back hard and get rid of all the big branch ends and wire out smaller branches. Other than that, I think most deciduous trees, it just weakens them too much when they do hard pruning during the summer. Because they go summer dormant here anyway, and if you're in there hard pruning them, then it weakens them even more.
Yeah. Are there specific trees you think are worth the effort for good ramification here, and then others that just don't perform well enough in our climate? Maybe they'll grow, but it's not worth the kind of effort to get a good bonsai tree out of them because they just aren't, they're very coarse and difficult to ramify here?
Trees like crab apples will grow fine here. I grew crab apples for years, but they and it didn't get cold enough for them to bloom and have crab apples on them. So I sent them up north. Trees like those Japanese apricots, they'll grow like weeds here, but they never bloom, and they're not a nice enough tree to have if they're not going to bloom. The whole point of growing crab apples and those apricots is to have the bloom. So if they don't bloom, I just send them further up north. Don't bother with them. We have too many trees that do well here to try to screw around with trees that don't do well here.
Yeah, yeah. I know there's a number of species that you say, I don't think it's worth my time. They're too coarse. They're hard to turn. Maybe you get halfway there, but that last half's difficult to achieve. And as you said, we have a lot of options in terms of what we can grow. So why focus on something that's difficult? So whether it's internodes, defoliation, or branch development, it all comes down to timing and observation. These techniques are interconnected. One affects the other. Knowing when and how to use them is what separates a tree with potential from a tree with polish. If someone came to you with a tropical tree that looked coarse and overgrown, where would you start? Internode control, defoliation, structural pruning? I think I know the answer. Probably structural pruning.
To get the structure back under control, if the tree is out of control, you need to get the basic structure back to where it should be before you start anything else. Because once you get the basic structure in, then you can start growing smaller secondary branches and stuff like that. But if the basic structure is way off, then no matter what you do with the ramification, it's not going to look good.
And what's a common mistake that even experienced growers here make when trying to refine trees in a warm environment with a long growing season?
They don't manage the top growth enough. Trees that are just way overgrown, the bottom branches are getting weak because people don't prune the top branch, the top third of the tree enough. You have to keep the top under control and not so much control on the bottom branches. Otherwise, it's just going to grow up and the bottom branches are going to get weak and die.
You have to balance the energy in the tree. And if it's an apically dominant tree, meaning that it tends to want to grow at the top more than the bottom, then you're going to have to focus on pruning at the top much more than the bottom. If you could give one piece of advice to help people develop trees with tighter growth in Florida, what would it be?
Prune enough. Most people don't prune enough. They don't spend enough time with their trees, and they let them grow out too far before they prune them. And when you do that, you just never get good ramification.
So keep your trees in shape, and don't be afraid to cut back occasionally.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to let it grow periodically. If you let it grow every other week, then you're not going to get good ramification. But every now and then, you just have to let it grow.
So it's a kind of a balancing act, because you've got this, on one hand, you need to trim this tree and keep it under control. On the other hand, you need to let the tree grow.
Right.
So you have to decide, what place am I in with the tree right now?
Yep.
And have a plan that, okay, I'm going to do it this year and maybe this next year, but the year after that, I'm going to do something a little different. Maybe I'm going to let it grow out a little bit more between pruning.
Yeah, you can put trees in a bigger pot even and just let them relax, because trees want to grow and they need to grow. And the bonsai process is to make the tree weaker. And when you do that continually, it just gets weaker. So you have to balance that with letting it grow.
Makes sense. So in closing, some, I think, key insights to take away here. Short internodes start with controlled energy, right? Balancing the top of the tree with the bottom of the tree, a balanced fertilizer. And defoliation is a surgical tool, not necessarily a routine operation.
Yeah.
And ramification requires patience and awareness of the climate that you're growing in terms of how we get there. Okay, so for this episode, I think that's about it. Thank you, Mike, for doing this. For those of you listening and watching online, please click the subscribe button or the follow button, depending which platform you're listening or watching on. And we hope to see you again here next time. Also, feel free to leave a comment, share your own experiences with the techniques we've discussed, any helpful ideas or hints or experiences you've had that we didn't mention. Or if you think we got something wrong, let us know. We're happy to learn from others out there that have their own experiences. So thank you guys again for being here. And if you've struggled with long internodes, failed defoliations, or stubborn ramification, don't give up. The key is adaptation. As we've heard today, you can build fine detail in the tropics. It just takes the right timing and the right techniques.